So this particular program and project, he was trying to find some of those darker aspects in people. So they're particularly targeting children who they think were possessed or something of that manner, that were able to do something like that. But from what I know now is that they were wrong about me. They thought that I had some type of entity attachment or possession, and that's not the truth. What they were seeing was really me. They were seeing what was inside of me.
Hello, curious minds. Welcome back. Today we have a guest with a unique story. Her name is Olivia James, and she's spent years trying to get some very strange and hidden information out into the world. She has lived through things that most of us would find hard to even imagine, I would say. Things connected to secret government programs like MK Ultra. Olivia, great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Olivia, again, thank you so much for joining us today. And how are you feeling and what's been on your mind as you've continued sharing your story with others?
I think that this information is so important. I'm trying to get it out more and more as best I can, different platforms and things like that, because it's so important to build our network. I'm trying to build a network for disclosure to get, more secret information out. So I think all of us, the more we connect and work together, I think that's what's good for humanity.
Yeah. Talking about MK Ultra, I'd love to know, how did your story really begin and when did you first
Yes.
realize that you were part of these secret programs or started experiencing the maybe the paranormal side of things?
Yeah, sure. I'm just going to kind of free flow talk about
Yeah.
how I started and how I became to be in this program, and then kind of go into some of the different aspects of it from starting from childhood, because that's really where it started. So I usually start by saying I had very interesting parents. That's how I start every podcast, because it's true. I had both of my parents, they were involved in major drug trafficking in the 1960s. So my father, he was recruited into military intelligence at a very young age, 18 years old. And he was stationed on the German-Russian border, where he was a code breaker. So he was doing a lot of that work at a very young age, mind you, from a very small town. So it's very interesting that he got recruited, some poor kid from a small town, to get taken into military intelligence. It's very interesting how that happened. So when he came out of that, he kind of got into drug trafficking. And if you wanted to research it, it's very well known information that in the 1960s and early 70s, that a lot of different, what we call three-letter agencies, for the American government, were assisting in those drug trafficking trades. It's pretty much well-known information at this point. So him and my mother both were using various ways to get drugs back and forth across the Mexican border, which they used bus, they used plane, they used boat, they used car, they used different ways, and they were doing very well. And back then, when they were thinking they were making about $50,000 a day, and in those times, that was a lot of money for young kids to be making. So it was very lucrative, but it's also very risky. It was very scary, and it's a very dangerous lifestyle. So they were going through that, doing very well. My mother also helped him, build his business. She was more of the launderer, and she also did the bus trafficking. And she always says that when she would go back and forth across the bus with the drug strapped to her stomach, that no one bothered her because she could speak English, so they wouldn't. But if you research anything, you can also research this, that there was an actual contract between, cartels and other government agencies for when they were going back and forth across the border by bus, that they were not to be bothered. So it was more of a collaboration than people realize. And that's just a method of research for people to find that information. It's not hard. So they were going along doing that drug trafficking. And what started to happen is my father got addicted to his own supply, and he was trafficking heroin. So he became a risk to the whole operation by doing that. He wasn't completing his work properly because of his addiction. So he started to kind of have a downfall, and they decided to do something about it. They were trying to scare him at first by doing these, kind of like what we call raids. They would kind of raid his house to see if he had anything in there. And the first one didn't go too well. And they thought they could scare him a little into straightening out, and he didn't. So they did it again, and they took him into custody. And there was a very public trial. It was in newspaper. Back then, everything was in newspapers and drawings and things like that in the newspapers and TV. So it went on for a long time, and he was looking at a lot of for going to prison for life based on what he was doing. He was going to be in prison for a long time. And at the end, he was just, the whole entire case was dismissed. They said was they had the wrong person, and they didn't, but they said that, and they let him go, and they gave him a government job. So they hired a well-known drug addict and trafficker for a local government job. So in learning what I know now, I realized and I found out that in order for him to stay out of prison, he had to give something up. And that something was me. He signed me over to them, signed on the dotted line that they could use me so he could stay out of prison. So he did it to save himself and to cover his own behind. And, because he was a coward, he was too afraid to go to prison. So he was willing to give something up. And that's how I got taken into the MK Ultra program and trained in that way. So, yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. So how old have you been then?
Well, when they were doing the drug trafficking, I was just a baby. So early 70s, I was just a baby to childhood. And the MK Ultra part happened around 6 to 7 years old when they actually started the major training. So this happened in the US, and it was at a psychiatric hospital. I was taken to a psychiatric hospital about 6 or 7 years old, I want to say, from what I look like. And when I went there, the main programmer and coordinator of it was a woman, was a female psychiatrist. And she was very, I don't know, when I was a little kid, I didn't grow up because I grew up in a very, drug-filled environment, that kind of thing. So I didn't see people like her very often. She was always very poised and very sophisticated looking. So I kind of looked at her and trusted her as like an authority figure because I didn't grow up around people like that. But they used that kind of thing against you. And there was only one other child at that particular program. I believe it was a very isolated program in this place because they were doing things that they hadn't tried before. And what their main focus was trying to create a process called syncopated dissociation, which they felt that if they would traumatize and torture two children at the same time, they were hoping that they could learn to dissociate at the same time and to leave the body at the same time to escape that trauma, that physical trauma. They felt that there could be some type of energetic force created when that would happen between the two people, and a strength. That's what they were trying to experiment on. So they would use and it was a place I called the playroom. And that's, in my mind, all I could remember as a child is the playroom. And that's where they took place a lot of the physical abuse. They were using psychological abuse, emotional, sexual, all of it. And they were using it very systematically. So when I'm thinking of that, they would change an activity probably every 15 minutes or so. So it reminded me of a kind of like a young children's school program where they're changing activities constantly to keep the momentum going of what they were doing. And, we were getting harmed. We were being forced to eat, sandwiches filled with feces. And if you wouldn't eat it, they'd slap you or hurt you in some way. So while they were doing this, I was there about 6 months. They were getting to a point where we wouldn't respond anymore to the abuse. And that's what they wanted. They wanted you to train you to be so good that you didn't respond to the abuse. You didn't ask for anything. You didn't ask to use the bathroom. You didn't ask for food. You didn't cry. So they were breaking down the psyche of children so fully that they would create pockets and space in your mind. And that's where they would call that building altars. So when you can break down the mind of someone, then you can build an alternate personality in that particular child and program it and train it to do different things.
Sorry. So the woman that supervised you've talked
Yes.
about, she knew all about it?
She was the program coordinator of it.
Oh.
She's the one that told everyone how to do these things. She was the main handler. She was also using electroshock therapy, LSD, and hypnosis regularly. She was using a lot of hypnosis, and that's where they found that I and this other child would be good, very good assets for any type of program, because we were able to go so deep with hypnosis. We were passing, you know, I call it, when I do it now, I call it reaching the outer realms. Because when we're doing it, you're leaving the limits of the physical body and the physical mind behind. You're traveling, with a huge power, which is your higher self. And I was able to do that even as a child. She trained us to do that with hypnosis. So they were able to find out how to train me, how to train these particular personalities, which now they call it dissociative identity disorder. But I honestly feel like that diagnosis is too simplified to describe what we had experienced and them building altars in us, because it's way more complex than that. Now that I am able to do, hypnosis and remote viewing, that kind of thing, I was able to look inside my own mind and see these different personalities, these alters. And these aren't just small pieces of a personality. These particular parts have created their own worlds inside your mind. So your mind is way more complex than you realize. If a piece of you can create a world, imagine what you could do. If that's able to, I've seen it myself in my own mind. And also, like, when I'm looking in my mind, I went so far as, because you know how people talk about the matrix. They talk about it as an external process outside of the body. But when I saw the matrix, it was an individualized thing inside the mind. I saw lines everywhere. There was boxes, there's hidden rooms everywhere. The matrix was inside the mind, not an external product of our reality. So I thought that was very interesting to see that myself firsthand, because of course we've all watched movies and we've been influenced by it and thinking that the matrix was outside of ourselves, but it was inside my own mind. So it was very interesting to see that.
So what you're saying is they are erasing your hard drive, so to speak,
Yes.
and create different personalities.
Yes.
And I've talked to some guy here in Germany who writes books about it, and he told me similar things. And he said they can create thousands of personalities.
Yes. Yes. I particularly only, from what I have discovered, about 118.
And how do
And
they activate these personalities? If they want to activate a specific personality, how does it activate?
for me, they were, from what I can remember being in that place, they were using flashing lights, colored lights. They were using visual imagery and they would use codes. They would use symbols. And a lot of these, now that I'm an adult, a lot of these are very subconscious and subliminal. So if I were to see something, that triggered the eye, I would go into what I would consider like an alter or an altered trance. And it happens quite often. But now that I'm I've worked on it so much with hypnosis, I'm able to recognize that now. Before I couldn't. So for a lot of years, I wasn't able to control it. Now I can control it a lot better than I used to.
That means these personalities that they've created within you are still there?
Yes, all of them are there. I did so when I started discovering what was happening to me, and this was about 5-6 years ago now, um I I was having a lot of bleed through memories, and this was about 6 years ago. So I was having memories of doing things and seeing things that would just seemed impossible to me, didn't seem like me. And I was becoming very, anxious. I was having a lot of panic attacks and things like that. I had gotten a new professional job in an office where there was no reason for me to have panic attacks, but I was having them constantly at this job. And I knew there was something wrong with me. I was like, I had no idea. I couldn't keep it together. I was constantly struggling with my emotions. I was becoming very unstable at that time. And that's why I decided to start hypnosis. And I thought more it was, I don't know, just, it could have been anything. I thought maybe some kind of emotional thing that happened to me in the past that I had not dealt with, something like that. That's why I started. I didn't necessarily start because I knew what was going on with me. This is how I discovered it. So the first time I did hypnosis, I went so deep. I was under for about 5 or 6 hours, and I just talked the entire time, and I couldn't stop talking. It was like something inside of me took over, like whatever was in me was able to unleash itself and, come back to where I could use it. So now I do it. I've become quite good at it. And I've also been practicing learning how to remote view things. I call it psi remote viewing because I don't necessarily use the scientific process. It's a psychic ability. So I use bilocation, astral travel at the same time. And I also do something called hosting. But hosting is not channeling. I know people think that, because I'm letting things speak through me and speak through my body, that it's considered channeling. It's not. It's called hosting. And actually, demons taught me that word. They told me that what I'm doing is called hosting. So that's the word I use, because when they come into my body, they're not just, it's not just pictures in my head and me speaking it. They're actually using my body to speak. The real me, I go to sleep. I feel like I'm in a very safe, warm, kind of existence while they're speaking through me. So it doesn't harm me. And I don't recommend anyone else trying this because it's specific to me. I'm the person that can do this. I'm the one that has the ability to do this. And I don't think other people could come do this and come out of it very well, because I allow demonic entities to use my body to speak, and it doesn't damage me psychologically or physically. I can push it out at the end and there's no harm to me. I've done it, I don't know, hundreds of times.
Oh, wait a second. So are you
Yes.
are you saying that this hosting that you're talking about is some kind of side effect of the MK Ultra program, or is it did they
I
teach you?
so what I feel is that, well, what I know, what I've discovered, one of the reasons, so they decided, okay, so I'll go past where they considered me and this other child, his name was Jacob. They considered us successful and that we would make good assets based on what their findings from the research and when we were there. So the main programmer, the woman, she did a referral for me to meet someone because she thought I would be good for a different program. So I went to this gentleman's house, not a house, but his office. And he had when I'm looking at his office, it's very neutral looking furniture. It almost didn't look like a doctor's office, maybe more like an attorney's office or something. I don't know. But when I got there, I was very quiet. I never spoke because of what had happened to me at the psychiatric hospital. There was no speaking. We know we weren't supposed to ask questions. We were just kids. But his name was Dr. Green. And when I got to his office, he had two people there, and they were brother and sister. And I believe they were twins. And they were very light colored. I always describe them more. I think they had an albino condition. They're very light colored, very pale hair. And he told them to do an examination on me. And not, well, I called him Dr. Green, but other people, they say that Dr. Green is another word for Mangala. I don't know that for sure. I only know when I saw him, he was very old, frail, very frail looking, very old, bald, and he had very small little wire rimmed glasses. He was very old and elderly. So I don't know if he was that. And I did not feel a physical threat from this man, but when I'm around him, I always describe it as feeling like I was in a cage with a tiger, because just his presence, the energy of him was something that it's very hard to explain, because him being elderly, he wouldn't be a physical threat, but something about him, I always felt, a huge risk. Like I felt very scared to be around him, but he didn't harm me. But he had these two people did an examination on me. And so they were looking in my ears, looking in my eyes. They opened my mouth and made me say, ah. And when they looked in my mouth, they turned to him and they said, we can see the thing inside her. And that's when he decided to bring me into kind of like a side project called Project Traveler. So this project, and people wouldn't realize this, but a lot of these major private military and government agencies, there are some that are going very deep into the occult. And they're using that because there is power there. There is power of the occult, and there's power from that dark side. So this particular program and project, he was trying to find some of those darker aspects in people. So they're particularly targeting children who they think were possessed or something of that manner, that were able to do something like that. But from what I know now is that they were wrong about me they thought that I had some type of entity attachment or possession, and that's not the truth. What they were seeing was really me. They were seeing what was inside of me. And so I was going to explain that part of the process of being in the psychiatric hospital under hypnosis, because I was going so deep, they were able to see some of my past lives and who I had been before and why I would be good for this. So one of the lives I had, it was very ancient times, and I could see myself. And what I was what they consider like a dark jinn or a dark entity, something like that. I was called Harlowan then. And when I look at myself, I'm very much red energy. I'm not a physical form. I've seen myself in physical form, and it's not something anybody would find like physically appealing. It was just a very knotted, gnarled form. It didn't look fully formed. So I know that a lot of us entities, we are not able to, we can, but it's not easy to physically form into this reality. That's why we take an energetic form a lot of time. And in the time when I was a dark jinn, I was using the blood to travel in. I would travel in someone's bloodstream like a virus. So very much a parasitical entity. And a lot of these entities, when they speak, and even when I spoke, I always thought that I was higher than a lot of like humans or other races of beings, because a lot of us entities thought we were gods because we were worshipped then like that. We were revered and worshipped as gods. So we still hung on to that idea and that ideology that we were higher than we were. But because of that particular life, that was one of the ways in which they thought I would be good for some specific programs because of that, because I was able to almost like possess other people. Because I would find what I would call like a victim or prey. This is an example. I would find somebody maybe walking in a desert. I would see him and I would kind of try to, scare him a little, infiltrate his life. And what that would begin the part of the oppression. I would constantly be pushing my energy and my thoughts into him. And eventually my goal would have been, as a dark entity, would have been to make him either hurt himself or hurt other people or ruin his life. And that's how I lived. And that's how I lived for thousands of years like that, just feeding off that dark energy. And when I was talking, so when I'm under hypnosis, I have an ability and I call it talking to someone's head. So when I can remote view, I'm not just looking at a thing. I'm there. I can be there. There's no time. There's no time when you're doing this kind of thing. You're bridging that gap. You can go anywhere you want to go. I've never seen a limit to where I could go. You can go backwards, forwards, side, anywhere. So I was able to see that. And she told me that this part of me said that she thought she was doing something good. She didn't even know she was evil. She didn't know the concept of evil because she just was this thing. She said, I thought I was helping people because they wanted to experience darkness and they called out to me. So I ran to them. And it is true that some people do call out to these dark entities and they want them, to meet them or talk to them or take over for them. So in a way, I thought I was helping people when I was a dark entity. I didn't know that I was harming them. So I thought that's what they wanted.
I'm sorry. When
Yes.
you lived as this dark entity, so where did you live? In some kind of astral realm or?
Yes, we're all energy. I was all energy. And I always say that my brothers were the jinn and we lived forever. So it was more of like an energetic place. It's not, to me, I don't feel like it's a physical realm. I feel like it's more an energetic realm. And a lot of the entities and demons I've met now, they told me so much, they give me so much information. They said in the beginning, there was a huge barrier put up between their world and ours. So between them and this world. And they said that's where that legend comes from. Have you ever heard the vampire legend where they say you have to be invited in?
Yes.
So they said that comes from them. That's not a vampire legend. That's from them, because you definitely have to be invited in to take over their body. And they call it the beckoning. They call it a heart call. And they hear somebody saying they don't want to, be alive anymore. They don't want to do this anymore. They run to it. They said, oh, they want me to take over. They want me to live for them. And so that's how they kind of get invited into places. And a lot of people do, call out to the darkness. So I was going to, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So so you lived as an astral parasite, so to speak.
Yeah, she considers herself kind of like a trickster god, like a lower god, like a trickster god. But when I'm looking at her, I consider it more like a parasitical entity because she was feeding off them and she was traveling by blood, like as a virus. So that's why a lot of the
Mm.
energy I feel around her is red.
That's an interesting concept, traveling with the bloodstream inside the bloodstream. That's very
Yeah.
interesting idea to think about, to wrap your mind around. So when you lived inside the bloodstream, so to speak, so what did you catch the feelings of this of the person you were attached to, or could you
I'll,
did you
I
see
can just,
could you
I'll
read
be
his mind?
honest. Yes, I'll be honest. I loved it as a dark entity because that was my life. I loved, infiltrating their lives and making them do bad things or making them, pretty much ruin their own lives. I would stay with them long enough until they ruined their life. And then I would move on to the next victim. And I lived like that, like I said, for thousands of years. I remember one person I infiltrated his life. It was a baker in kind of very old times. He was baking and I made him burn down his house. So things like that we were doing, as a darker entity. But like I said, I didn't know I was evil. Nobody had taught me, about that word because I thought, I was just, I just was, who I was. I didn't know there was a word for that. I just thought that now that I know, though, it's very interesting. And I can see why when those two twins did that examination on me and they said they saw the thing inside me, I can see why they said that now because it's part of me. I can't delete a past life. I can't make it eliminate it. I can't make it go away. So
Yeah.
I can see how they could see it inside me, but they were wrong when they thought it was an attachment. They were trying to, harness and take that attachment from me and, kind of like make it almost like a measurable scientific activity. And that's not possible, because it wasn't separate from me. It was me. That whatever they were seeing was at me and my cellular level. So it's still there. And that's kind of why I can do what I can do now in terms of hosting other entities, because these demons and these entities have told me that whenever I go under hypnosis, it's like completely black where they are. And then when they can see me going under hypnosis because there'll be a huge shining light in this darkness and they travel so quickly to find me because we're almost the same energy. They say I'm the same frequency almost as them, like a kindred spirit, because I'm like them. That's why they don't harm me. They never hurt me. They never try to, they can't because I am one of them. Why would they? When I'm already like them, they can't do that. And that's really strange. I understand how strange it sounds, but at the same time, I consider myself a good person in this life as a human. I'm not that I'm not that thing anymore, but I still am because I can't make it go away. But I'm a very much normal, helpful, what I consider a good person, so it was always very interesting for me to see myself in that position. But now then it helped me understand why they would have chosen me for certain projects. And that's just I was going to tell you about another one that they saw and that I discovered. And it was I was what they considered in the 1400s. I was considered like a physical, like a psychic medium. And in this life, I was just a woman. I had two children. My husband had died, and I was in a village, and it was in Italy, and I was helping a lot of the other villagers because of my ability for psychic ability. I was helping them, speak to loved ones that had passed on and things like that. And somebody must have told because when the Inquisition came through, I was like one of the first people they came and rounded up. And they came to my house and they took me from my children. They dragged me and punched me in the face and, dragged me off to this, dungeon type place. And I got that whole treatment of, being tortured and questioned constantly. And I was so angry. And I was very angry because my children had to go live with my uncle. And he brought them on probably one of the last days I was alive. He brought them to see me. There was a very small hole, like a window where they could see into like the lower dungeon. And he brought them there to see me one last time. And I wish he wouldn't have done that because I know I looked horrible, horrible. They had me hanging from the ceiling by these kind of like chain rope things they had, and my arms were just, I was up by my arms. And at that point, I couldn't even feel my arms anymore. They had gone numb or probably like almost like dead arms because they had been like, chained for so long. There was no more feeling. And I didn't die from like, they didn't burn me at the stake or anything. I actually died from starvation and dehydration. So it was a very, uh, I don't know, very emotional, traumatic life. And during that last day, I was so angry because of all the good I tried to do for the world, and I didn't get any help. Nobody stopped them, these men, from doing this to me. And I was so angry, and I called out to the darkness. And, I said, whatever can hurt them, do it. So I attached, that dark energy was, around me still, because I wanted them to hurt those people who hurt me. And I can see now, being a psychic medium that life, and, having that ability kind of awaken inside of me. I didn't know I could do this until, about 3 or 4 years ago. I didn't know I could do this. I didn't know it was a possibility for me. I had never known that. But I can see how it been awakened, because of that life. This had, woken back up inside of me.
With all I heard so far about you being this dark entity, that makes me think about consciousness. We are talking
Yes.
about consciousness a lot on the podcast, and most of the time when we talk about consciousness, people talk about it in a very, let's say, romantic kind of way.
Yes.
It's very colorful and bright and peaceful thing. But now you're telling me you've been some kind of dark entity, and
Yes.
you practically infiltrated someone else's consciousness. And
Yes, I did.
yeah,
And
so
it's still possible. Not that I do it very much, because I do consider it the dark arts, but they call it remote influencing. And I can remotely, if there was something I wanted, okay, so if I wanted to remote view somewhere that was secret, I could kind of go into this place and look for a person that was vulnerable and not focused. And you push your energy kind of into that person and kind of make them either start typing at a computer or look for information that you need. That's completely possible. I've done that before. But I don't do that a lot, because I consider it the dark arts, because I don't want to, push myself onto people, whether I can do it or not. But it's because of that life that this is awakened in me. I feel that part of it was because of that, and also because of MK Ultra and them creating those personalities, and you know me just being able to dissociate so well and leave the body so well, that it was all tied together in creating this full, person, this asset that they could use. So there was one other life that was significant and why they chose me. And I can imagine when they were doing this, how surprising it would be to see a little tiny 6-year-old girl talking about her past lives as a demonic entity, as a psychic medium, and then as another life as a serial killer. So I had a life where I believe it was the late 1700s, early 1800s, that time period. And in this life, I had lost my parents at a very young age, very young. So I had been living on the streets for a long time, and I traveled around everywhere. I traveled everywhere, just, looking for work, looking for odd jobs in order to feed myself. And I ended up meeting another gentleman, and we had become kind of partners because we had the same type of darkness inside us. So we became very close in that way, because that darkness was in me, and I felt it, and it made me be and want to do things to other people that was, very evil. Like I would want to hurt. And so me and this other gentleman, we pretty much would travel around to villages and find, women alone, and physically harm them, and just keep doing that. We would travel to different cities to do that. And we would find them, out, in those days, a lot of women were, out in the fields by themselves, gathering things. So we were able to find them, and we would just leave them there. And we went to this particular village. We had gotten very careless because we thought we were invincible. We were doing this so often. We went to a particular village, and we were the new people in the village. And we had done that. We had found a woman out by herself, and we attacked her and left her for what. And we ended up going to a pub around the corner, and we were having a good time. But they ended up finding the woman there, and the only new people in town was us. So they put two and together. They knew it was us. So we ran as quick as we could, and we found a barn, and we locked ourselves in this barn, and we thought it was a good hiding spot. It wasn't. They found us right away, and what they did was lock us in and set the barn on fire. And so I remember trying to climb up towards the top of the barn, and it didn't work. We both ended up, being burned alive, which we deserved. So I mean, imagine being 6 years old or seven and, saying these kinds of things and relaying this information to people saying, I did this, I was this. And, I'm telling the story very conservatively, but imagine when I was, giving the full details, of the situation to somebody and they were probably, kind of dumbfounded at what they had discovered, inside people. What you can discover inside people is amazing. You can see all their past lives. You can find these things. Because if I could find it as a child, they can definitely find it using their techniques and their technology that they have. They're very advanced in technology that we have no idea. Literally, the public has no idea how advanced some of the technology is that these private military companies have obtained for their various reasons.
I'm curious, how do you dream? What are your dreams like, especially in the context of no of the MK Ultra thing when you say there are these all these different personalities? What are your dreams
Yes,
like?
it's so interesting. It could be anything, and a lot of some of the memories seep through your subconscious, so you will dream of them. Some people say that if you're dreaming, it's just a dream. No, I know the difference between a dream and something else. I know that. And I think a lot of other people would know it if you were experiencing it. You would know the difference between a dream and then something seeping into your subconscious. Because there would be times where I'd just be meditating, basic meditation where I started, for my own anxiety, was learning to do that. And as soon as I got close, I would hear a voice in my head, but not really an auditory. I call it a mental message because it wasn't particular auditory, like outside of my external hearing. And it would say, if you come any closer, we're going to take everything from you. So that's when I noticed that something or someone was using what we consider V2K, voice to skull technology, to place those, to give me that message. You need to back off. They would say, pretty much, Olivia needs to back off. She's going too far. She's getting too close. She's getting too many memories. So when I first started getting all these memories, I was getting a lot of those mental messages, and they wanted to try to me to hurt myself and, pretty much destroy myself because that was the only way they could see me backing off of this. So they would try to place that in my mind. But that particular programming didn't work for me. It didn't work on me. So they weren't able to, solidify that inside myself. The things that did scare me a little is when they threaten somebody I care about. Then, of course, that gets my attention. But they know that. They test different things and they know what will, make you afraid.
Is there a lot of, let's say, astral traveling going on?
Yes, yes. And I got really good at that. And there, when I first started this, there is no possible way that I ever thought I could do anything like this. It just wasn't in my realm of possibility. I just didn't know. I awakened it within myself with hypnosis, and I awakened everything they had done to me and pulled out of me. I awakened to it again. So it was almost like living so many different lives at one time because I was starting to, meet, and I still, once you awaken these things in yourself, you still feel it. You can feel, like, I can feel sometimes this dark jinn. If I get a little bit like towards a trance, I can feel her, feel that energy, feel that strength that she has. And that's one thing that they do possess is strength. Some of these elder gods, they have a lot of strength because they're so powerful based on how many followers they had, how much they're revered and worshiped. They still are kind of attracted to that. And that's how they still want to live. And they definitely want to come back, to this world because they told me that they feel like they call themselves a race of beings. They don't consider themselves, they say they are a race of beings too. They said that they feel like they're dying out, because they've lost so many worshipers and so much reverence. Because in the ancient days, and I always say that it was a very seductive time. It was. They were very much worshipped, but now people don't need those gods anymore. Because if they want a monster or a villain in their life, they just can find them next door. There's so many evil people just in humanity now. They don't look to the gods for that power shift anymore. So they feel like they're dying out and they've lost so many followers. So when certain entities build their energy back up to where they have a new following, like Isis, they feel like they're coming back to life. And Isis herself, she came through me and spoke through me. And I know people think that she's very a lovely, angel and things like that. When I saw her and what she showed me, she's a creature. She said, yes, I'm an angel, but I'm an angel of darkness. And she said, I wanted to thank you all for bringing me back to life and making it possible. And she said, we've ripped holes in our environment, in our world, to allow them to come back again. She said, thank you for doing that, because we are ready to come back here and take the world.
Do you still experience some kind of boundaries inside your head when you try to think about mm, specific topics? I don't know, in context of the MK Ultra program.
Yes, there's always going to be that, because you can, what I did was I eventually learned how to put my alters to sleep. I didn't kill them, I didn't harm them, because they're a part of me. I can't do that. But I did ask them. And what people think that, these alters are out to get them, they're out to hurt you. But when I really, went deep under hypnosis, and I work with a very great hypnotherapist, and I went deep and I asked them, I said, your time's over. All the work is done. Can you please go to sleep and go into retirement? I called it. And they agreed. So I was afraid of all these alters my whole life. And in the end, they worked with me and they went to sleep for me so I could have a normal life and, kind of discover my original self. So this is kind of like my original self that's speaking. So I haven't been this original self in a really long time. So actually, it's still a rediscovering process. I'm constantly meeting my original self and learning about myself, because I had been gone so long and it was always alter shifting. One alter was in control, then another one was in control. So if I'm thinking about kind of who I am now, it's way different from when I was younger, at a younger age. It was just, and, people think, well, that's just maturity. It was more than that. It was a completely different personality, because I don't act anything similar to that.
I was wondering, how can you be sure that the person that you speak to me right now is the real,
Mm-hmm.
the original personality?
Yes, and I guess because because I can even tell just by the way I speak. And if somebody knew me well, they can tell by the way I talk. Because when I'm switching alters, it's not just a, a mental thing. I feel it physically. Not everybody does. I do. So when I start to get an alter shift, my face will start to go numb, and I'll stop being able to talk so well. I won't be able to speak so well.
Hmm.
I just the words don't come out for some reason, and that's how I noticed that it's a shifting alter. And also because of the dissociation process. Usually when I switch alters, I also will go into trance and start to dissociate. So that's a very much very eye-opening thing, and it's something that I can actually realize when it's happening. That's how I'm able to combat it if it starts to happen. And it has happened periodically, not very often now. Maybe once a year it happens now where I shift, but I'm able to, if I go under hypnosis and I shift an alter, I go under hypnosis, I can search the inner workings of my mind to find that code that I need to switch it off. And I've had to do that before, because I can't stay an alter, because those alters were made for dangerous work. They were made for corporate espionage. They were made for, attacks, different psychic things, different things than what I need for this life. So I try to switch it off, because I don't want to work with that type of environment.
So I was wondering, yeah, you know about these alters, but do these alters know about each other? Do they does everybody knows everyone? And
No, they don't. And sometimes I think now they do, but previously I don't believe they did. Because there was so many barriers between us. And I was going to talk about one specific alter I have. Her name is Ariel. And this is something I've discovered as a survival alter. This is my information that I've discovered. It's called a survival alter. And this alter only comes out in the most direst of circumstances, because it's created to keep you alive. So if I have to bring this alter out, nothing survives except for me. So it barely comes out. This was used in times of like when I had to do very dangerous work. So this particular alter, she looks like a possessed little girl. She wears a dirty nightgown. And I did try to see in my mind what she looked like, where she was, because my entire life I always felt haunted by a possessed girl. I felt like I saw it all the time. It was seeping into my subconscious. I would dream about it. I was having phobia about it. Like about possessed little girls because I didn't know why. And it's because of her. Like I always say that I realized that when I saw that thing reaching out in the darkness, that shadow in the room, that thing that I was so afraid of, it was myself the whole time that I was afraid of. The fear was because of that. And that was the most base part of myself, because when she comes out, she loses her humanity because it is a survival technique. It's it's to stay alive. So you lose your humanity in that particular instance. So when I went to see her, in my mind, I saw she had created an entire world inside me. And it looks like, when I look at it, it looks like something a child would create, a scary place that a child would think of. Like there's a scary haunted house, there's a little cemetery next to it, and there's a dark haunted forest where she lives. And she has this kind of like companion. It looks like a Wendigo, like a large antlered type demon that she keeps near her. So, and it sounds very silly to me. And yes, I realized that. But when I went into my mind to see it, I could see how this had been created by a child's mind at the age of 6. I could see how a child created this. A child created this as the scariest part, and I see why it sounds childlike, because I was a child when it was created. That survival altar was created during that time that I was at the psychiatric hospital, experience all the physical, emotional, and sexual trauma so they could create this.
That's very fascinating. And let's stick to this topic for a minute. I wanted to ask you, so these altars are created. So
Yes.
they created these altars. So do these altars know that they are created, that they are practically not real?
I thought they weren't real. I thought that too, that I thought they weren't real. They weren't real people, but they are, because they're me. It's almost like having a million lives inside of you.
Yes, I'm sorry.
It's
Yes,
me. Yes.
the thing is, I want to know how complex the whole thing is. So
So
there,
complex.
let's say there's just 50 altars. Every altar must have a story, a life created
Yes.
within your head, and that sounds very, very strange to me. So 50, if it's only 50, let's say it's 50 lives that have memories from childhood until the here and now. Sounds crazy to me, right?
Hmm.
It's hard to wrap my mind around.
Yes. But remember, I have what I call front altars. So the main 6 are the controlling ones.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that were constantly shifting. The rest of the 118, they were kind of, used as needed, and we call those floating altars. So they don't necessarily have names all the time. And sometimes I'm discovering different altars, and maybe they had like a short-lived time, but the front 6 are the main ones. I have a survival altar, I have a monarch altar, a beta altar, you know, I have one that's an occult altar, things like that. So they had these different tasks, they had different personalities, they had different work they had to do, and different things they were trained in and that they felt powerful in. There's one altar that has a photographic memory. So whenever she's around, she could just be recording and she won't know what she's recording. So if somebody, and this is what's really interesting, I could just sit there and listen. And I don't even know if I'm taking it in, but if somebody were to take me and place me under hypnosis, either by force or, voluntary, they could dive so deep where they could get that information. And that's used in case you were captured and for an interrogation, you won't know. You were literally won't know the information unless they put you under hypnosis, because that's how deep you place it. It's almost like hiding it behind lock and key in your mind. So it's perfect for espionage, corporate espionage, which they used me a lot for. So if we were captured or interrogated, nobody could get the information from you because it's hidden behind a mental wall that they have access to with codes and other types of techniques.
Maybe, I don't know. So let's say there's an altar that created a whole story around it, around him, with friends and family and stuff. So this altar breaks through, but there is no friends and family from from the life he created. So what's the reaction?
I don't know. I mean, this is so complex. I wish I could bring up an altar for it right now for you to speak to, so it could be, I've done that before once or twice in a private situation. I brought an
Yeah.
altar for it just because I wanted to be able to get the whole story. So I do have one altar, and I call it the Gray Mouse altar. And that's, the title of my book series because it had such a significant impact on my life.
Mhm.
This particular altar was created to, perform these basic corporate espionage, work. And let me tell you, that is the most dangerous work I've ever done because it there's huge powers that these huge powers behind the scenes are competing with each other for conquest and, resources and power in general. That's what they want. So these huge companies, these huge agencies, these huge groups, elites, everything, they're all competing with each other. So there's always this work to gain leverage against each other, blackmail each other, steal information, change information, all that. And that's what they want us to do. So as a gray mouse alter, I was trained to, get into places quietly, or either infiltrate somebody's life. Well, they would never know who I was or what I could do. Never. If anybody ever saw me and they would see me somewhere, they would never assume that I could do what I could do. They could because a gray mouse gets in somewhere quick and gets out like a little mouse. You quiet. None of it requires noise. You get in a building, you get out, you do what you're supposed to do. A lot of the times I would be paired with a few other girls, sometimes which I didn't like because there was more of a risk when there was other people assigned to you. So I'd rather have worked alone. And a lot of that gray mouse personality is a person that's alone all the time, that little mouse trying to get in and out of buildings quietly. Because I felt that was a less of a risk if I was just only responsible for myself. Because once you have other people, the dynamic changes. Then you have to watch out for them. They have to watch out for you. It just, then the mission becomes less of importance and more of survival. And when that happens, they consider that failure. They don't want you thinking of yourself first. That's how they train us in these programs. The mission is the most important at all costs, no matter what. Even if it's something like a corporate job, it's the mission that counts because these people are paying and none of us get paid for this. They force us. It's almost like slavery. You're contracted and you're forced to do these things. And sometimes you don't even know you're doing it and you don't even know why you do it because it's so easy to wipe your mind of it with hypnosis and some of this other technology. They could hide these things in my mind. I wouldn't know because of how easy it is for them to push me into trance and dissociation.
So your mind or your brain is a hard drive for information.
To me, it's so, and I think a lot of people would see this if they were able to go deep into the far reaches of their mind.
Yeah.
They could see how complex the mind is. And there's worlds inside you. It's not just one world, it's worlds inside your mind, how complex and how vast the mind is and
Yeah.
that whole experience. I was going to say that I forgot to go towards when I was 13. So I did all this, I learned all this stuff as a child, these different, MK Ultra things. But at 13, they decided that I was to go to another place for training. So I took a train and there was an older gentleman with me that guided me. He was kind of like, I don't know, what you consider him kind of like, not really a teacher, but maybe a handler or something like that. And he was very, well dressed older man and nobody questioned it. I got on a train and this what sounds weird, but the train was to the moon. So I took a train to the moon. I don't know how. I don't know how that happened because I was a little kid. I was 13 and I wasn't able to ask questions. But that's what it looked like to me. It looked like we were in a train station underground. And we got on this train. We got to the moon. And in this moon, there was it was a huge underground base. And I was way at one of the lower levels. And on this lower level, it was classrooms. And I could see like on the walls. I remember exactly there was a general that was going to be retiring after 20 years of service called General Land, Land. So I remember seeing a poster for it on one of the walls of the classroom. He was retiring from his service and they were going to be having a banquet for him. That always sticks in my mind because it kind of solidified, like, why would I remember that? The name of a general that was on a poster. So in this particular base, I would come and go to class every day. And then I would just they had like these separate rooms for us. It was like almost like dorms. You just be in a room by yourself and then you go back to class, and it was the same thing every day. But the class they wanted me to take was called psionics. And in this class, it was almost all adults. I was the youngest person ever assigned to this class. But there was something special in my file stamped that said that this woman had to work with me. And it was a younger woman. That was my teacher. She looked like she was like in her late 20s, but she was very, very intelligent. I don't even know if that was her right age, but she didn't want to work with somebody so young. She was used to working with adults, but she had to because I had a special, kind of like a special sector tag. And so what she was assigned to do is to teach me personality profiling. And there were other people in the classroom that had other abilities that I didn't know what they could do with these abilities. Like somebody was able to produce an excessive amount of moisture in their body, which I don't know what he can even do with that. And mostly it was just leaking out of his fingers. So I don't know what that. And there was another person that talked to animals. There were like, telepaths and energy readers, things like that. Nobody else besides me was doing personality profiling. So, and she was very stern with me, but I appreciate it now that I know, because in her thinking of being stern with me, that she was trying to save my life. Because she always told me, and I remember the exact phrase she said, it only takes one look and one word, and you have to know who these people are and what they're thinking, because it could mean certain death if you don't. She was trying to teach me to save my life, being stern that way. And I appreciate it now, but at the time, I'm sure it was very scary to have somebody be so, harsh with me and speak to me that way. But she was trying to teach me to stay alive by being quick. She said, you have to be quick. You have to know by one handshake, one eye blink, one, facial expressions, everything. You have to take everything in. It's like a very quick reading by personality profiling. You have to know what they're thinking and if they could be a threat or not. So based on that, I was able to do that for training. And I ended up doing that work later on in my life when this agency used me. So I wasn't old enough to do that particular work. That was something that was going to be used later on. So when I was a little bit older, I was doing something called beta tracking work when I was about in 19 to my early 20s. And this particular work, they had contracted and they forced you, like I said, it was a particular type of work where I would be infiltrating someone else's life by, kind of like faking a romantic relationship. So I would have somebody that they would give me a name, and we called them marks. Like this would be my mark. So this particular person, I had to meet him, get involved with him, get in his life, and just be around him or do whatever they told me to do. And a lot of it was intelligence gathering. So some of these people were powerful people, children of powerful people, friends of them, associates, anybody that had information, because it was all intelligence gathering missions. So I did a lot of that work. And at the end of that, I ended up getting a promotion. So they ended up transferring me off to a base on Mars. So I know it sounds crazy, but I'm sorry, but it's the truth that our government and many other governments have bases off planet, and they have for a very long time. And these bases are filled with private military agencies pursuing whatever their demands and agenda is for power, conquest, and control of this world and others. So that's just it. They're pursuing conquest. So in this particular base, it was called the McCreary base, and it was on the South Canal region of Mars. So this base was near a kind of like a landing where different ships would come in with resources and things like that. But I had gotten a promotion because they said it was for a job well done and everything I had been forced to do. They said I'd done good work. So they gave me a promotion for which I was going to be using my personality profile. And I was actually in the corporate sector. So a lot of other people that have stories like this about being in off-planet military groups, they're talking about large military operations where they're actual soldiers and things and foot soldiers. I wasn't, even though I was under, my particular umbrella was under the ground force battalion, and I was under a division called Mariner. And I even know my service number and everything. So what I was doing is working for human resources. So any type of new recruit that would come into our base, they would meet with me. I would, take them in my office for about an hour. I would perform various assessments, speak to them. And basically what I was doing is personality profiling that they taught me, that the woman taught me. And it was reading the person because I wanted to figure out what would be a good job opportunity for them and where I could place them at what job, because they were given jobs based on my recommendations. And I would send it up to the general. I even remember the general's name. His name was General Asher. He had an office right outside of mine, and his office was all windows on the outside. They kept it like that. It was kind of like an open office. And he had a secretary right at his front desk. So I was doing that for quite some time. But what happened was I was doing that a lot, and I was meeting a lot of different recruits. And during the time I was doing it, it was probably like the early 2000s. I was doing that work. And now a lot of the recruits, they're voluntary. We back then, some of them were forced. Now they're voluntary recruits, and a lot of they're getting recruited right out of our military. And they're going, they're being told that, they're very excited when they're being met. They're excited. They think they're, in a sci-fi movie, this is like a movie. They're so excited. They don't know when they get up there, they might just get a job as a janitor. I think in their minds, they're thinking they're going to be fighting aliens and things. It's not like that. They're going up there to work as a janitor, plumber. They have so many different divisions they need work for. I would, send people out to work for, mining, drilling, water treatment. They have like agriculture. They even had an entertainment division. So there was all different types of different divisions that you would kind of assign them to work at. So I was doing that work for a long time. And eventually, and it mirrored in my same life I have now, it mirrored this. My programming started to break down. So I was having memories, things were seeping into my subconscious. I didn't know where they came from. And it was because I was having memories of my real life. And when we're talking about this isn't like a parallel life. This was a physical thing that happened. They took me, placed me there. And at the end of my 20 years of service, they used various chemicals and technology to age reverse us. And they push you back to where you are to live your shitty life, live your crappy life that you had. So I was halfway through my term of service, and my programming started to break down. I even got so bold as to where I searched the general's office to look for answers, and I couldn't find anything. But that's the kind of thing I was doing. Like, I was what I know now is depression, but on that base, there's no word for that. You're not allowed to be depressed. You're not allowed to have emotions, really. You don't have a lot of that. I remembered that being a very lonely, isolated time. And they really encouraged me to isolate myself because they felt like that kept my personality profiling ability sharp. But when that started to go, it started to weaken because my programming was breaking down. So my ability was kind of shifting, and I wasn't able to do the same work as I was doing before. It wasn't working well. So they kind of demoted me, and they had me working on being as a liaison for incoming ship and just signing off on paperwork, things like that. And they also had me work on a medical satellite station for a while, kind of as like a medical social worker, where people would come in and I would try to get them to sign off on papers.
It sounds like a wild story, but I've heard similar things before from people that has been on the podcast. And
Yes, there's more people.
yeah, we're not the only one talking about similar things. Like I said, it's very interesting. So you're talking about the secret space program, so to speak.
Yes, that's it. So
Man,
that's kind of what I got into.
I think we have to meet again and talk some more about your.
Oh my gosh, yes, I have so much more information.
I have the feeling it's so much more complex than I expected, to be honest. I think we have to meet again, like I said.
Yeah, I'd love to. It'd be great.
What advice would you give to others who might be experiencing fractured memories just like you or strange occurrences in their lives?
Keep seeking. And if you want to, because I don't recommend, if somebody's not interested in finding out, that they don't do it, because it's very difficult. But if you do have this, then I would seek for it, because I had something inside me that needed the truth.
Yeah.
And the truth has set me free. That's where I've gotten the most freedom on, is learning the truth about myself and my own history.
So, and you are completely out of it right now?
We think we are, but from what I know and from what I've remote viewed, nobody is. So they have you sign papers before you leave. And I know because I was one of the people that had them sign papers to make sure that they could use you at any time in the future if they needed you.
So I guess you're never really free. Yeah.
As far as I know, until we get this information out, and they have to let us go.
I imagine it being pretty dangerous speaking out just like you.
Yes, I I think so too. And but I really think that everybody needs the information and they need to be aware that this is happening. And it's I always say that the real world is more hidden than you realize. I always say that.
Hmm. So are you afraid of speaking out?
I don't want to lie and say I wasn't at first, but I think the mission is more important than my fear. The mission to help people wake up to this is more important than me being afraid.
Have you ever been contacted by someone and they told you to stop speaking out?
Yes, but it was during meditation and it's during terms I've when I do remote viewing.
So nobody came to your door and knocked and said,
Not yet, but I've had instances of being harmed,
hmm.
major illnesses, hurting being hurt, things like that.
Man, thank you so much for sharing your story. Like I said, we really have to meet again.
Yeah, thank you. I'd love to get into some more of the occult things next time we meet.
Yeah. Before we go, tell people where they can find your books.
Yes, both my books are available on Amazon. They're called the Gray Mouse series. One is called Sex, Space, and Mind Control, and the second one is called Purgatory.
Mm-hmm. I will put a link in the description.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Please stay with me for 2 more minutes, okay?
Okay.